Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us on another House of PMO session. Today's the 28th of September, which is actually one of these international days that you sometimes hear, like International Cake Day or Puppy Day or any of that kind of stuff. And it's actually Ask a Stupid Question Day. So over the last few days, we've been collecting some stupid questions, some stupid PMO questions. And we're going to be joined today by our lodger, and Graham. Hello, Graham. Hey, how are you?
Good evening. Hi, Lindsay. Thank you for having me. I'm good, thank you. The sun is out in the UK. What more can you ask for on a late September evening?
Indeed, indeed. So, Graham, can you tell us a little bit about you, please?
Yes, Graham Burke, as you said already, lodger. So at the House of PMO in the Den, really trying to enthuse others who are thinking about getting into PMO to get into PMO. I've been doing it and thoroughly enjoying it for a couple of decades. I think a lot of it is common sense, but common sense isn't very common. And therefore, the other reason I like it, but don't tell anybody, you get to go to all the important meetings, but you don't have any accountability to make big decisions. So that's really quite exciting as well. So yeah, been doing this a long time, mainly as I think it's now known as a POO, possibly sometimes as a POT, but a program office of one. I do work for myself through my own professional services company. So typically I most recently have gone in and been a body in a PMO or the PMO for a big program, and there is nobody else around me, hence the POO terminology. And looking forward to some of these questions that you're going to throw at us, I think.
Yeah, so these questions have been collected from PMO people over the last previous 5 days. We've also been out at a exhibition in London, so we were able to actually get some direct questions from people there as well. So we've got a good selection and some really good ones. So we're going to crack on and hopefully you quite a few of them, I hope. So here's the first one, Graham. This is for, how does having a PMO help the organization? Such a lovely question to start with. So how does having a PMO help the organization? What do you think?
We haven't set that up then. Definitely not. That's generally the first question, is it?
That's genuinely the first question.
Really? Okay. How does having a PMO help the organization? In so many ways. If the PMO is designed, constituted and sponsored effectively from the outset, it should be really focused on the change the business side of the business as opposed to run the business. So it's talking about improving capabilities, delivering strategy and strategic objectives. And even the question has PMO in it, right? So immediately you're like, okay, but which sort of PMO was the question asking about? And what I mean by that is, and to run some scenarios, if you work in a business where the general feeling is we start lots of stuff but don't really finish or deliver anything, then you might want some sort of portfolio office that makes sure you start and finish the right things in the right order to deliver some value. That would be a portfolio office. It might not go very deep, but it kind of sees a bit about everything. If you're in an organization where, God, let's not make the mistakes we did 2 years ago on this project, because that would be a nightmare, that would be more of a project office. That would be a project office with a specific sort of request and mandate to do some sort of lessons learned review so that you don't make the mistakes a third time. Mm-hmm. You could also make that a center of excellence and say, right, well, let's start from now and let's have some common methods and frameworks and templates and ways of doing things. And you set up a permanent office in a business sitting on the change the business side. And their entire role is to own that framework of how we do change here, so that whomever in the business asks or demands or mandates that we're going to run this project, everybody immediately goes, okay, center of excellence, show us how we do it. Yes, I remember those templates, and away you go. So it really depends on how you construct PMO. Lots of organizations that are big organizations or a very big a big budget for change, have a need to do lots of change, you would expect them to have some sort of center of excellence that owns frameworks and project methodologies, and then they would be the ones that then push project office or program office people into supporting individual projects or individual programs. And then sitting around that, you'd have the portfolio office that sits very closely with the executive to make sure we are doing these projects, we've stopped doing those, haven't we? Oh, you want to do a new project, where does that sit in the priorities? That sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, there is lots and lots of textbooks around. Indeed, there's the House of PMO's essentials courses, right, and textbook answers. But from my experience operating for 20 odd years as generally just satelliting into various organizations, that would be kind of the real life experience response to how does it help. It should help transform the business to where it wants to go, but it needs to be designed, set up and sponsored correctly.
Yeah. Well, the flip side to the question is what happens to an organization that's trying to deliver change that didn't have a PMO?
Okay, absolutely. So the easiest way to respond to that quickly, I think, would be, say, if you didn't have a portfolio office. If you don't have a portfolio office, then you're unlikely to have any understanding of all the change initiatives that all the leaders in that organization are trying to run. So you don't know if you've got 10 projects of a size or 100 mini-me's running. If you don't know how many projects you've got, you don't know how many people are trying to put some time into that. If you've got no framework, you don't know if people are spending most of their time on BAU or most of their time on change. If they're spending a lot of the time on BAU, then how are you delivering change? Well, because you've got lots of people walking around with capes on being superheroes, right? But that's only sustainable for so long. And then you find all our best people are leaving. Why is that? Well, because we're not. So there's all sorts of things that would be symptoms and perhaps indicators of, oh, we haven't really got a control of project offices. A portfolio office. Yeah. PMO in a project and program sense, every time you start one, somebody has to work out how you're going to do it. So if you haven't got a PMO, then typically you probably won't have a body of people called project managers or program managers. So you'll just give it to the best person in the business that knows that particular subject matter area expertise. So that person will spend the first X weeks and sleepless nights going, I don't know how to run a project. How am I going to do that? And then somebody else, they then go and have a coffee and moan about it. Said, oh, that's the same for me. I've been asked to do this project and I have no idea. What did you start with? So those are some of the symptoms and the challenges if you don't have PMO in the organization, I think.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Graham, based on a lot of the conversations we've been having recently, and certainly at the exhibition that we were at, it still seems that that is the case for a lot of organizations, that they don't have a portfolio level type office. So they're just doing a bunch of projects and programs, and some of it's going okay, some of it's chaotic. So it is very much a thing that's out there, and it's not just limited to kind of small, medium-sized businesses. This is big businesses that have been doing this kind of stuff for a while.
It's almost as if the successful businesses, and I've worked for some, they seem to make money despite their lack of project and program management, not because of it. It's like, oh my goodness, wow, but the share price is great. Okay, it could be fantastic if you did this better and had actually some benefits management at the end of it. Yeah, you're so right. I mean, cards on the table. I make a living going to organizations doing this. Why? Yeah. Why aren't organizations of any shape and size thinking we should kind of know what we need to be in the future? Yeah. I was listening to a podcast today, actually. It was really interesting. And this guy, he did say it wasn't his quote, so I can't say who it was, but he basically said, if you're not agile, then you're fragile. And you can treat that as an individual, right? But you could treat that as an organization. Every organization has to learn how to change. Yes. And right now, probably really quite quickly, given the world events. And if you haven't got the basics of some sort of list of initiatives, who's in charge of each, how much you're going to spend, what are you roughly trying to deliver, who's involved, and then some sort of summary status by color, by phase, by something, how on earth are you setting yourself up for success? Yeah. It
is until they get to a point where the business is in trouble because they've not changed enough. The code out of the world,
I do. So part of it comes down to, actually, if you go a level up, it becomes almost a question of organizational design rather than project program management maturity. In that, depending on the organization and the industry you're in, if you need to be consistently fleet of foot, why don't you have a transformation director? Yeah. Why is it given to the head of IT to manage change, or HR to manage right? So, and I don't see many transformation directors. Transformation or delivery functions sit somewhere either reporting into finance because it's all about the money, or all about operations because it's going to impact operations, right? But you need people with a different mindset than operations. So, yeah,
absolutely. And
I still think that has, if it doesn't come top down, it's going to struggle to grow bottom up.
Yeah, and we're certainly hearing a lot more of transformation officers starting up. And again, we're going to be digging into that subject soon, House of PMO, to find out exactly what it is that they're doing. But on to the second question that we had. Now, this is a really good one, because we've had this, we've had some sessions before around assurance. We've certainly listened to some experts that do it, that have had a lot of experience doing it. So this is, how can I run a governance gate or assurance review if I'm not a subject matter expert against a project manager who has 20 years plus at doing this kind of stuff? Which is a really valid question. So what do you reckon, Graham?
Okay, so there's let me answer this in two ways, if I may. From a process gate assurance perspective, really important to make sure that there's a documented, consistent governance gate or assurance. So let's call it a review process. So I haven't got to keep saying gate and assurance every time. So you'd want a well-documented review process that is operated every time. What's really essential is that process and the documentation around it clearly sets out how that process runs, what the criteria will be, what does good and success look like at each of those review gates, so that who's involved, which stakeholders, what's the level of seniority, all of those, I'm not going to say all those standard things, if you don't know, you don't know, but all of the things that would go to making a really good gating process. And then if you've got that, and as long as the PMO and I gave P in the broadest sense, the PMO that owns that process is well sponsored and has a strong support from that sponsor, it's less about the people that run it. It's more, but that's the way we do things here. That's the process. Those are the criteria. The board have committed to those criteria as being success. If you don't meet that bar, it's a board decision. Therefore, it doesn't matter how old, how experienced, what level of gravitas the individual that is doing it. It almost takes it away from the individual and makes it about the process. So that's the first thing I would say. But clearly you wouldn't want to be putting all that infrastructure in place 3 months after a project has started, it has been defined and scoped. That would be a little unfair. So you need to kind of break the seal, as it were, and get that process in and make sure that every subsequent project is aware that we do gates or reviews here. This is how they'll operate. This is your sort of checklist and criteria. This is the sort of evidence we'd expect to see. Here's the people that will be attending. But don't worry, we as a PMO provide a gating service, so we'll support you. Whatever. That needs to be up and front in place.
Yeah.
Flipping it around a bit, because what struck to me, the question was, and there's a PMO with 20 years experience, how can I possibly? So you could flip this and play on some of the personal dynamics here. And perhaps pitch it to said PM with 20 years experience. This is an opportunity for you to shine, right? You keep off the record, you keep telling us you're the best PM, we'll prove it. Why don't you sail through the gate, tick off every criteria? In fact, you're so good you don't even need to know the criteria because you know what's expected for a good review. In fact, actually, if you can really do this really well, Mr. PM with 20 years experience, we'd love you to be a use case and a best practice example. Would that be okay, Mr. PM with 20 years experience? Sorry, did I get a bit emotional? So you do you know what I mean? You could. It's about the process. Set it up front so that there's no arguing. Make sure it's sponsored. So it's not my 22-year-old just started in the PMO and the most junior member. It's the board's approval of the gate that's important. Therefore, anybody can do it, right? The flip side of that is make it all about them if you want to, and get them to prove they're so good, and we'll use it as a best case, and we'll use all your templates.
Absolutely, and that's brilliant because we honestly recently had sessions, and I'm going to get them to come up on the screen in the recording. But we've done something recently within an assurance. Somebody that does it day in, day out. We've also had a session recently on governance. Both of those touch on the kind of things you need to be thinking around in terms of the process. So that's brilliant. So it perfectly fits in with stuff we've already got that you can go and have a look at that follows on from Graham's comments. Now, this is a really interesting one, because not only we got this one coming through from somebody, but on the session today as well, got a similar kind of question. So when working in business as usual, how does a PMO not become a mostly administrative function? And just to kind of tag another question onto that, how should the PMO be involved in business as usual work, if at all? So there's a similar kind of question from different people. So what do you reckon, Graham? Because I'm a bit like, it's an interesting one. But, you know.
It is interesting, and I might need you to remind me of the second part to that.
Okay, we'll do.
Because recall doesn't seem to be switched on at the moment, so forgive me for that. So let me okay. When we're going to be, how does not become okay? So to be perfect, so being brutal, you're sat on the wrong side of the business, right? You should not be. Yes, no, I can say that. It's my experience. You shouldn't really be sat on the BAU side of an organization if you're trying to run a PMO. PMO is best suited to sitting on the change the business side of the house, whether that be in IT or the business or any function within. It needs to be about forward-looking, forward-facing, changing the future, and therefore, yeah. That, I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of the answer. You're sat on the wrong side of the organization. However, I wonder, therefore, if the person that's raised the question, perhaps they're using a term that we would recognize as PMO, but actually they might be sitting in more what I might call a COO, a COO office, which is typically a firefighting. I've just heard about this. It's almost your EA super house, as it were, which is your most senior 3 EAs have got the most experience of the organization. They report to the most experienced people, and they almost become a coup office themselves. And actually, they go firefighting stuff. And some of that firefighting is because something's gone wrong in the business. Okay. So that might be where this question is born of. But then I would say that's not a PMO, that's a coup. PMO is front foot, proactive. If you're BAU and doing administrating, you're reacting to our tasks of you. So putting that to one side.
Yeah. The follow-on question was.
Well, actually, I was going to just, if I may,
working in business as usual at all.
So let me finish off with both of those two. That you're on the wrong side of the business. Mm. If you're, regardless of whether you're a PMO or coup, a service catalog is what's going to help. Okay. So this is where you set out. We are a PMO or a coup, doesn't matter, but these are the services you can expect from us. So if I talk about it from a PMO perspective, we will run a planning service. We'll run a gating service to help go manage gates for you and make sure the right people come and you have all the materials. We'll run a charter service where we help you charter and scope the project. We'll run RAID management for you. We'll do a dependency log. We'll facilitate work. If you set all those out, knowing roughly how many people are, how many projects are in the organization, how much time does each take? We've got a team of 3. Can't do all those. Okay, we'll chop dependency management off the service catalog. If you've got a service catalog, people will come to you and you can say, well, this is what we provide, nothing else. If you want somebody to book a flight, do it yourself or find something else. We provide these services. So regardless of whether you're the PMO on the BAU function or actually a coup, a service catalog would really help. Yeah. Sorry to talk across you. So now, could you give me the second follow-up question?
Oh yeah, no, it is, and I totally agree. You know, there should be other people within the business that are running on the operational side of the business doing that kind of work.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why the PMO has to extend its remit when actually there's enough work on the change side of the business. But yeah, it was an interesting question, and but it gives you an insight just into how different people's experiences are of working within a PMO. And when we've often said that one of the reasons why people get involved in things like House of PMO, because it's good for you to be able to see what other people are doing. So this particular person coming up with a question like that, I wonder if they'd come along to a flash mob evening and got talking to 5 or 6 different people, it would have opened their eyes to think, actually, what I'm doing is very, very different and perhaps not what is seen out there as being a PMO, you know.
Absolutely, but equally, and lots of people are called PMOs doing a lot of a business as usual administrative work. That is where a lot of PMOs start. If you start and you're too good at it, you're unlikely to ever move into true PMO, because you'll be valuable to the business as you are. But also, if you're good at it and you know what PMO should be, you've got a chance of changing the remit and moving onto the change side. I have seen. I mean, you're getting back into that transformation director type piece we were talking about previously on the previous question. And yeah, if you're firefighting on the business side, a proactive version of that might be some sort of operational excellence function, which does a lot of Lean Six Sigma and process efficiencies and things of that sort, and tries to find wastage and gaps in processes. That might sit in a coup, and that might be, but I would call that more of an operational excellence type function. It's still not really a PMO.
Yeah.
Again, it would be really interesting to find the person that asked the question and go, okay, what do you define as a PMO? That would be my question back, and then we could point them in the right direction. You said there was a second question that wasn't on the slide, I think. What was that part? Sorry.
You said, should the PMO be involved in business as usual work at all?
Again, being brutal, no. I think it will gradually dilute. Not gradually, it will dilute your ability to stand at the top table and inform strategic change. Because you're having to divert resources to go do BAU. So my view is no, you shouldn't be involved in BAU, or you have to be very clear that there's a PMO that does these services and a branch of the PMO which is called something else which can provide these services, which might be that would be a compromise. But if I was brought in to design a PMO and implement it, it wouldn't be doing BAU.
No, and I would argue that from a career perspective, if I'm a PMO practitioner that enjoys the role of PMO and everything that entails, actually, I don't want to go down the BAU route just because this particular organization at this particular time wants that. I'm not prepared to step into that. I'm quite happy, and I'm a professional at the PMO change.
So and yeah, again, being brutally honest, I've worked as an independent for over 10 years. There are some roles that I will have a chat and I'll go, oh, I don't think I want to take this one, because this one actually removes me too far from PMO. And in the contract world, more often than not, you're as good as your last contract. And if that wasn't right in the sweet spot of PMO, it could be quite tricky. But that's easier for me to say because I work for myself and I can choose. If you work as an employee, that might be a harder conversation. And you'd probably need to think and plan how you're going to move from BAU and swivet and pivot to get to that sort of PMO nirvana, especially if you're building your career experience, expertise. You're a member of House of PMO, you're doing some PMO learning courses. If you're fully into it, you're going to need to think and plan how you drag your organization with you, almost.
Or you just vote with your feet.
Or you go, I'll go and get a proper job. I'll probably get my job.
Add some context, because that was the question from me. About that BAU and the dilemma. Just because we had a discussion this afternoon, dilemma is we're doing business planning. We're sort of starting to move into more advanced portfolio management, and where the two shall meet and who looks after what. So big strategic things that would be in the portfolio, stuff that would be in the business plan that's potentially not just turning the wheels of the business, but is not strategic and big enough to be in the portfolio, who then would look after it? Sort of in no man's land, really. So it's a sort of interesting.
So to answer that, if I were you, I would be bidding for the big strategic portfolio stuff, because that's where you can really affect change and let's be honest, it's more exciting and sexy. But I understand the dilemma about, but there's all this other work, and if the PMO doesn't own it, it could. But in many ways, if you're firm on the vision for the PMO, that's really not the PMO's problem. That's Chief Operating Officer's problem, right? What you can do on the PMO portfolio office side is very, very carefully craft some of those interdependencies and risks. And it's not that it's us and them, because you're all one part of the business, but certainly the strategic change portfolio, there are some interdependencies and risks based on what's happening in the business, especially as there doesn't appear to be a central function looking after that work, because we're not, because we do change. That would be how I would try and influence stakeholders to get what I think would be the right solution.
Yeah, I just put in the chat there's a new head of project and transformation coming in on Monday. So it'll be interesting to see where she goes with it and what she thinks is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Information role there again. So.
Yeah, good luck. Sounds fun times.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question that we had was where do you start when putting a PMO in place? Now, this is a great question. Again, these are real questions, by the way, Graham, because I know. I
was going to say this.
Not only do you do this as a living, but you've also taught on this subject as well, haven't you? So,
well, I was going to say the very first place you could is come along to the setting of a PMO report, like my PMO learning. The trainer in that is absolutely. Oh, it's me. They're really good. Yeah. So where to start? So the real, and possibly alluded to this already with some of the previous questions, the starting point is what's the business challenge, or what's the challenge that's vexing the leadership group of a business the most. It really does need to be top down. What is the business facing, looking into? What is it trying to, where's it want to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years? What is the strategy? Ideally, what sort of strategic objectives are there? Okay, so do we want to have one wide corporate sort of, well, the entire company portfolio office? Actually, are we just looking at one very big, really key critical program for the business? All of those things will start to lead you down a, first of those scenarios would be a portfolio office. Second of those would be a program office. So it's really driven from what's the business challenge, and what, if you're, because you are designing a function from scratch, a PMO, you can kind of design the optimal solution. Now, always remember, again, with world events, that what might be optimal now or a plan for a year's time may not be quite what's required in 3 years. So it's a plan that shouldn't sit and gather dust on a shelf. It should be a plan that you iterate regularly. It could even be a plan that has a series of stepping stones or phases or transition states, whatever you use in your vernacular, where well, okay, so what's really important is to support this very big program. Okay, so let's create a program office for that. Let's make it 1.5 times resourced, so that half of that resource can be using some of what they're learning and developing for the program office. We could fold that into some sort of program management framework for the business, because that doesn't exist yet. And then the PMO manager, if you had one, okay, so they could take on the role of the beginnings of some sort of portfolio office that reports on the program, but starts to delve into some of the functions and some of the other strategic change. So yeah, it comes top down, and then good design. If I had been engaged to set that up, I'd want to make sure I had really good sponsorship at top of the house level, board level, director level, whatever the top of the house is. Doesn't really matter who that is, but as long as they are director, board level, and will champion your cause and will give you the best chance of success. Because let's be honest, some of the future conversations, if you set up that PMO structure and design correctly, could be quite challenging conversations. I.e., why are we still letting people sit on this project when we said 2 weeks ago or 3 meetings ago it's canned? Because I'll tell you why, because it's pet project for such and such, and you'll need your sponsor to go, we don't do pet projects, we agreed the criteria, we follow the criteria. It's not criteria and then have a chat, it's criteria. And that's what the portfolio office owns. So some of those conversations could be quite challenging. So really important that you have good senior level sponsorship.
I think one of the things we've learned recently in a number of sessions at the PMO conference, where there's been a few actually case studies where they've won PMO of the year awards, so they're doing pretty good. But some of the insights that I tend to, you know, remember, and again, we'll put these on screen, the ones that you can go away and actually watch, where they talked about, you know, exactly what you've talked about, Graham, where they've got to that level where it's come from the top, what's the strategic objectives, and what's the objective of the PMO, and then you're going down that route of like, okay, so how are we going to be able to offer services that will meet that mandate? And then they talked about, you know, putting in place roadmaps, which seem to work really well, because it's the other side of this is that the PMO, when it's getting set up and being put in place, you need to make sure that everybody else knows what steps are along the way, so making it really visual and getting people bought into it, because it's, you know, it can come from the top.
Yeah,
PMO's doing some great work, and then you've got project managers, change managers, BAs, planners, everybody else who's involved in change also needs to understand what's going on. And it just struck me is that a lot of the recent case studies, and they've gone down that route of, here's the roadmap, we're doing it in a kind of rolling wave planning type, you know, we'll do this, then we'll set the next bit and all of that. And there's some really good examples that you can dip into as well.
Yeah. I would, to add to that, depending on the size of your PMO, you probably should run it as a project or a program, and you should follow the same disciplines that you want every other project program that follows you to run. And yes, you're absolutely right. There's what I've kind of is how I set up the function, but there is a huge amount of effort in hearts and minds, people side of this, bringing, as we had on the top, one of the other questions, you know, the PM with 20 years experience that's never done it the way we want to do it before, I'm not going to play. There's all sorts of interpersonal people dynamics that need to be managed along the way. Roadmaps, transition states, change management. How are you going to implement a PM framework? That's a change management piece. Yeah, absolutely. Big
subject, but then again, lots of people like yourself out there doing it for organizations today, and the fact that, you know, you are doing it and been doing it for a while just goes to show that it's not an easy thing.
Yeah, and perhaps we should say that there is a lot of, there's quite a lot of science around PPM and project management offices and portfolio and value management offices and agile and waterfall. But there's also, we also have to be pragmatic and apply some common sense. There is no real right and wrong answer to that question, where to start. It's about understanding the organization in which you are operating, their challenges, and what's going to be pragmatic, fit for purpose. And additionally, I would say, you know, look at MVPs. What's the minimum viable product of a PMO? Don't try and go guns blazing all at once, right? What moves the needle? What 20% of effort in terms of PMO setup can create 80% of the benefit? And then never try and do the 20% on top, right? Because it's, what's the point? Just do MVP over and over and over.
Yeah, well, you know, you've said yourself, you talked about poo and pots. I don't know if you explained it, but poo's obviously PMO of one, as in one person or two people, pots. But you can't do it all. So you've actually got to really,
you have to pick and choose and provide a level of service that you can do amazingly well to gain support and people to follow you. But that by definition limits the breadth of what you're doing. Absolutely. But yeah, there is no right and wrong. It has to be the right answer for that organization at that moment in time.
Yeah. And that's why you come along to House of PMO events, where you can just chat about this with other people.
Correct. And find you're not the only one with the same problem that you think you have, because everybody else is in the same place, or half of the audience are in the same place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, you're going to try and move me on.
This next question, we get this quite a bit as well. My initial thing says it's, why aren't project managers in PMOs? Right, I'm going to let you take it, because I've heard this question over and over and over again over the years, but I suspect I know what you're going to say.
Okay, well, don't. So if that's the case, don't judge me then on the answer. I feel like I'm being set up for a test that I might fail here.
Okay, I suspect you agree, but go on. So why aren't project managers in a PMO?
Well, actually, some are is the answer. So it very much depends on. Going to sound like a nagging horse. It depends on the way PMO and PMs are structured in an organization. I've been in big organizations, banks, where it's actually a part of a delivery function, and that delivery function has a director of change or something of that type, and 2 reporting lines, one of which is PMO in the broadest sense. So it could be portfolio office, a center of excellence that owns frameworks, templates, SharePoint sites, etc. But they also line manage through a hierarchy the PM delivery people and as PMs. Yeah. Equally, I've worked in organizations where there's only a PMO, and the PMOs aren't part of it. Sorry, the PMs are not part of the PMO because PMs don't exist. They just hoik out the best person for the business to run a project. But that I've seen quite a lot. Yeah. And then sometimes, yes, you do have the PMOs are over there and the PMs sit in some sort of different reporting line. Mm-hmm. Pros and cons. One of the pros for 2 different sort of, a delivery function over here reporting to somebody and a PMO over there is it creates some separation. And with separation, you typically get a bit of tension. So if you're an organization that wants to run gating reviews, some separation between the people that run the process, own the framework, set the criteria, agree the criteria, having a different reporting line to the people that have to come along and meet that is quite sensible. Otherwise, it's a bit like sending the kids away and marking your own homework, right? So you've created some tension. Yeah. On the flip side of that, if everybody reports to the same reporting line, whether that be within the PMO or part of the delivery function, you'd like to think that you could co-create frameworks, disciplines, templates, ways of working with the people that are going to do it. That co-creation, therefore, perhaps could be more effective, more efficient for the organization in terms of delivery of change. And then you don't have the separation of tension for gates, but you have other benefits of I'm accountable for delivering everything because we report to the one transformation director under a delivery function. And why are we starting to fail? Is it because we haven't got the right PM capability, or is it our processes so is it a mixture between the two? You have a single point of contact in the business that has that challenge to address it. Yeah. So pros and cons, but I've seen where they are in the PMO, where they're not in the PMO, and where PMs don't exist, and there is just a PMO.
Yeah, I think generally, I would think from my experience over the last decade or so, that you tend to see this model of project managers being within the PMO. It's something you see more stateside. It's very American model, I think, more so than it is here in the UK. I'd be interested to know if that goes further in terms of Europe or Asia or Australia or what it is. But, it's certainly what we tend to see.
That's a fair point. I'm working for an American organisation at the moment, and that's absolutely the case. And if I look back to my previous engagements with UK-based organisations, PMs were not part of the PMO I was operating and working in. So that would echo that. Yeah.
I'll tell you one other con about that model of having them all in the same place is that it sometimes has an impact then on where the career path looks like.
Yes.
It tends to be the entry level comes in and it's a very project supporting or project role. And the path is all about becoming a project manager as opposed to becoming a specialist around PMO stuff. It's like, the goal is to be a project manager. And you talk to any person who's been in PMO for a number of years, yourself included, no doubt, that, that's not where you wanted to go. It's, there's a big enough role there with PMO that goes right up to board level. Why go down that route of project manager? And I think that is one of the cons of having that kind of model, I would say.
I would entirely agree with that. And indeed, when I first started in PMO, it was exactly that. Once you prove yourself as a PMO, we'll give you a project.
Yeah.
And I found very quickly, actually, I don't want sleepless nights at the weekend. I want to play golf at the weekend. I'll stick in the PMO, thank you very much.
Would have been an excellent project manager that wouldn't have had that.
I don't know. But my golf handicap wouldn't have been so good. I think the world has changed, and it's very clear you can make a very good career and living and have a lovely life as a PMO person. It's no longer they do PMO, we do change. It's all part of the same place. But you're right. If you have those together, typically the PMs will always think of themselves as a slightly higher breed than PMO people.
Yeah, no, totally. You heard it here. You can have a really nice life as a PMO person. So,
which is kind of, apologies for the plug, but that's kind of why I wanted to set up the Den, right? Is a lot of PMO stuff is common sense. I'm not a particularly bright person. I left school a long time ago with just 5 A levels, didn't go do A levels, didn't do a degree. but I've made a career in PMO. It's doable. So that was kind of part of the reason for setting up the Den, was for that, to try and enthuse others to say, I'm not being a PMO to become a PM. I'm being a PMO because that's my choice. Sorry, you're moving me on. Go on.
And totally. So if you're listening and you you perhaps at the early stages of your career in PMO, you absolutely need to drop Graham a line through the Den, because again, that he's just said, that's the bit that he really gets a kick out of, helping next generation to come through. Here's another classic one. So what should I prioritize, risk management or dependency management? These feel really like a real technical thing, but it elevates. It's like, it's ask a stupid question. It's only a stupid, you know what I mean? It's not a stupid question. It's a brilliant question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah,
and you can't ask people for questions and then challenge them on the questions. That's unfair. So I don't know who it was that rose this, but bugger. Yeah. So first I'm going to cheat and say, well, you need to define risk management and dependency management. But let's forget the textbooks for a bit. I've worked mainly as a program officer one, and because of that, you might imagine that the organisation doesn't have a huge amount of maturity in the project and program management space. Therefore, more often than not, dependency management is a step too far in terms of that organisation and what they're up for.
Okay.
So therefore, I've always made sure we do risk. You should always look towards the future and risk, what might go wrong. However, when you actually, if you've got a keen eye and a trained PMO eye, you might spot that some of the risks are written as risks, but they're actually dependency. Not textbook, not ideal. Anathema for all the purists out there, but sorry, anathema for the purists, but in the big wide world, that's one way of getting around it. So I would lean towards risk management, certainly as part of an MVP set of services. And as I say, any of the big humdinger dependencies, you could kind of work, there is a risk that, blah, blah, blah. So you can kind of cover it as and when the time is right. Then adding in a layer of, okay, well, now we need to look at dependencies because we keep being tripped up by too many risks or whatever it might be. Perhaps that's the time to say, right, now we need a dependency management service that looks at that. I would also say dependency management, again, personal experience, in my mind is born more of a waterfall world. Okay. where you what do you want by when, how much, yeah, okay, what did you want again, right, okay, so I can deliver it a month later, but it's going to cost 1.5 times as much. Okay, good, are we good, done. Then you go away and you plan it, and that's when you think about dependency management. Yeah, in my experience. Yeah. If you're working in more of an agile environment, and not agile as a process, but just it's a bit more fluid, it's unlikely you're going to necessarily look at all your dependencies, because you're going to kind of start building something, showing it to somebody, saying, can I have it in blue? Put it in blue. Okay. Oh, I actually like it in purple. Put it in purple, and away you go. And you're just going to kind of, but even then, I would run some sort of risk. What could go wrong next week sort of exercise. So again, dependency management, I don't know, it'd be interesting to ask back, is dependency management dying a death because we keep moving towards agile? I don't know. But so to answer your question, I think I would start with risk. Yeah. I'd fudge some of the entries in the risk log to cover some of the big dependencies. And if and when there's a point where it's dependencies that keep catching us out, perhaps now we can educate the customers, the people we work with, to go, perhaps we really do need to do some sort of dependency management piece. Yeah, no, that's a good answer. I like that. Absolutely. And wow, does that mean you didn't like all the other answers because you didn't say that to us? No, do you know why? Because I suppose because secretly I would probably have asked a question like that, because you know, it's I was thinking back for when I first started out, one of my questions that I then asked somebody for ages was when they were going on about, oh, and we do governance and we do assurance. And I'm like, can somebody please just explain to me what the difference is? That's what I really wanted to. And this is really similar. Yes. Yeah, to me, it's like it's one of those types of questions. So so the reason why I just said it like that, Graham, is that you did it very eloquently and clear and transparently. So well done you.
They, I like, here's a harder one though. And I reckon this is probably something more, because you like all this kind of stuff, don't you? Where it's it kind of people, not saying that, the technical side of PMO work, but I know obviously because you've been doing the job for a number of years that you really like the people-y bit, the hearts.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely, because you can't do successful PPM without people, right? Frameworks are lovely and templates are great, but ultimately PPM is about trying to get people that don't really report to you hierarchically, to do some work they probably don't want to do, and then to do it a darn sight quicker than they've ever done it before. Yeah, that's what you're trying to do in projects and programs. So therefore, that's all about people enthusing, engaging, leading, inspiring, motivating. It's all people.
But a good definition of PMO though is that we're there to support decision.
Correct. Yes.
In all of that. So this question, how do I
bring me back to the question?
Make a decision. What do you think?
Okay, so probably not going to like the answer, I don't think, but it's, to my mind, it's attention to detail and option creation.
Okay.
Would be how I'd go about this. So if somebody came to me with I need you to make a decision, right? And I'm presented with, so it's either this or it's that. That's not a decision, that's a dilemma, right? There's going to be a winner and a loser. I'm kind of damned if I do, damned if I don't, right? So as a decision maker, I'd want to see 3 things I'm choosing from, because then I've got a real choice.
Okay, all right, that's interesting.
Because you could do some sort of triangulation of most important, okay, the winner is. Whereas if it's just 2 options, you'll go, I'm really not sure. So I would always ask for 3 options. Now, you could say somebody will make one up just to bring 3, and it's but I would be pushing for, I'd push the envelope on option creation. But that comes from a culture of not making mistakes and don't worry about making mistakes and being creative. But so I'd be looking for those 3. And then for each of those, it's then attention to detail, because it's a full storyboard. It's what's led us to this point? Why are you even bringing me a decision? What's the challenge? Okay, my first reaction is, do I have to do anything? So what is the impact of doing nothing? And then attention to detail. Make that bottom line P&L share price stuff. Yeah. Because senior people, that's kind of where their mind's at. So if you bring a problem and don't quantify it in that terms, they'll say, "Oh, give it to." They'll push it over. Yeah. And then again, options. So option 1, what does that give me? What is the impact? How much of the initial impact do we mitigate with option 1? All of it? Majority of it? Where are we with that? What's the pros and cons? Is there some downside to this option as well as the upside in trying to mitigate the challenge you've brought to me? Obviously, what's the cost? And what is that do nothing cost impact? And can I bear it? Actually, I know you've brought me a challenge, but actually, I'm the guy that's going to sign it off. We'll accept it. Let's not divert resources. Yeah. And I said, I'd like 3 options because 2 is just a dilemma. So then you need to do that 3 times over. And then as a PMO, if you're a value add PMO, you wouldn't necessarily be making those decisions, but you'd be drawing people in to come up with the options. You'd be asking them challenging questions to bring the full storyboard. And then you would gather the people that have been involved and go, okay, so if they said, you decide, which one would you recommend? Yes. And then as a decision maker, I'm being given a genuine choice of options, not a dilemma. I'm being given the full storyboard for each of the options in front of me. And I'm even being given a recommendation based on the people that are living and breathing this day in and day out, who, let's be honest, are going to be closer to it than I am, because I'm playing golf every Friday with the directors. And every Wednesday I take somebody out for an entertaining meal with a port at the end of it, right? So those are the people that know. And if somebody came to me with that, I would really struggle not to make a decision, because that's just not acceptable, right? If you brought that compelling body of work to the person that's at the top of the tree and is agreed that's who will make decisions, I can't cop out and not make a decision with that. I have to be, I'm compelled to make that decision. So
if we think about PMOs today, then when they're doing a lot of reporting, say dashboard, all this kind of stuff, essentially the things that are getting pushed out and saying, look, there you go, that's what's happening. where actually a lot of the time there isn't this, all that good stuff you've just said is not part of the, they don't make recommendations. They don't lay it out as here's the 3 options. This is what this report is, this is what this dashboard is showing you at the moment. We think we have an issue with this thing. And here's what we think we should be, you perhaps want to think about. It's that kind of next levels stuff that I think a lot of PMOs know they need to go down that route. And to be fair, some of them are starting to do it by thinking about things like perhaps we need to do better visuals, so at least people can see stuff better.
Yeah,
it's fine, but this is going further than that, isn't it? And you use those terms, I hate the term value added PMO, only because a lot of the time it's not defined what you mean by value. That's the reason I don't like the term. But it's like, it's that next level stuff. We're supposed to be there to support decision making, and it's how much support you're giving, really.
Yeah. So that doesn't. It's going gloomy my end, but the lights not helping. Okay. So how about this though? There's no reason why, as a PMO function, you could enrich some of your logs, for example. So let's say this is an issue that needs a decision.
Yes.
You could enrich your log. Any issue, before it gets taken to make a decision, there has to be 3 options and a recommendation.
Yeah.
And you drive the process, and therefore you're more demanding of the project lead or the person that's been assigned that issue to get resolution. Okay, we've had this process running for a bit. Everybody bought into the process, all that hearts and minds we talked about earlier. But you enrich your log that drives that process. You're still not having to necessarily do the thinking, but what you are doing is you're holding the mirror of, this is the minimum standard before we even get to that point to ask the decision to be made. That's the way around that.
Yeah, I suppose the like get out clause is like, look, we're giving you some options here. We're not saying that they're absolutely perfect, but just based on our experience, this was what we've seen previously or whatever else. But actually what it's allowing you to do is like, look, we put these 3 things on the table. You might not want to do this, but at least it's forcing you to have the bloody conversation.
Yes.
And to not.
And I have seen the decision maker respond by saying, I don't like 3. I actually like 1 and 2 both. Is there something that's which is a bit of both? Yes. I'll give you 3 days, go and work that out for me and come back, and then I'll make the decision.
Yeah. And that's a win for a PMO, isn't it?
Correct. Because I was going to say adding value. They are creating the data set in a sensible way, enabling the top level people in the organization to really think and stretch themselves as well.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely, I agree. Now, this is going to stretch your thinking, I think, this next question. So here it is. What would happen if projects could only have or could only be red or green, never amber? Now, this makes me laugh because a number of times we've chatted about this at flash mobs. I know it sounds really geeky and a bit sad, but it nearly always comes up in conversation because it's people like to share the way that they do this kind of stuff about red, amber, green. Some people will go on and say, oh yeah, we actually have a pink as well, which means X or Y. And honestly, it's one of those things that always comes up about, the red, amber, green, the rag stick, all that kind of stuff. It's a really good question though, isn't it?
Can you pop it up again for me just quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Is that it? That's all there is to the question, just that?
That's all there is to the question. I think somebody's being a little cheeky.
Okay.
It's like, unless it's something that they genuinely carry around in their head every day.
Yeah. So I would love to know who's asked the question, and ask them what brought them to this point. To my mind, this is a possible solution to a root cause. I'd love to know the root cause, but the name of the game is Ask a Stupid Question Day. So let's have a bash. How long have you got? So I've said already, I'm a people person. So let me answer it from a people perspective, right? And let's imagine for one moment that I'm now a PM with sleepless nights, making decisions on a daily basis that I'm really not sure about, even though I created 3 options and went through. Anyway, so I'm a PM in an environment, right? Damned if I do, damned if I don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'll make it green, but I know it's not bloody green. I'm having sleepless nights. I'm working 20 hours a day. I'm chasing people around the world to get stuff done, and it's just becoming too stressful. Or I make it red. Oh, thank God for that. But every other week it goes red because I'm flagging I need some support from my sponsor, but all my peers and perhaps even the sponsor thinks I'm just not up to it, and I'm a PM that's really struggling out of my depth. So my first reaction is it'd be a very difficult place to work as a PM. From the human side of change management, project delivery, that's going to be really hard. And a lot of people voting with their feet, going on long-term sick, whatever it might be. And then secondly, if I'm a decision maker, I'm going to really struggle to deliver the strategic objectives of the business because I'm never going to have time to correct things and put boxes back on the truck, because the very definition of red is it's going to fail on one measure, whether that be time, scope, delivery, or agile. It just isn't an MVP that the customer's happy with. Red means we are not going to make that in some way, shape, or form. So I'm never going to have the time to put things back. I'm going to be firefighting. Typically costs money. Well, there's a cost, whether it's money, time, effort, credibility, asking people to work another weekend, but I'll stay and I'll pay for pizzas. That might be a bit old-fashioned, but there's a cost to that. So I do think, yeah, I don't think it's a viable way of doing it. But again, I would love to know what's the root cause that prompted the question.
Well, we might be able to get a bit of an insight here, because we've got Lorna on the session, and she said that in her place that they have no amber where they're at, but they've added something called AR and AG, which is obviously amber red, amber green, to stop people going for the middle option.
Yes. Okay. Like that. I like that. You're either above the line or below the line.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Yeah. You're forcing them to say, are you more red or are you more green? Because there was 5, and then you're 5 and people still go for the middle option. So is it nearly okay, or is it nearly not okay? So
yeah. No, I like that.
A little bit.
It's funny, when in a former life I used to do training delivery and things, and we used to have to design courses, and then the training needs assessment and the evaluation forms, and we always had even numbers, because then you can't pick the middle. So if you have smiley faces, you have 5 of them, people just go down the middle, done, right? Whereas if you have 4, as you've now done, Lorna, you have to, crikey, you've got to really think and answer the question: was that above the line good, below the line bad? So I actually really like that. I've typically worked in a 3 or a 5 system, but I like the 4 system. That's
I would argue, why are we even reducing them to colours? If we're spending all this time trying to give people options, and there's status reports, and there's words, and there's why do we bring it right down to black and white? Because projects are never black and white. We've said all that. So the people involved, it's never going to be straightforward. And we do all this stuff about, let's give people options, let's tell them a story, let's get them bought in. But no, let's just reduce it to a colour. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense in the grand scheme of things. But it is an interesting question. But I'd be interested to see.
Equally, lots of states, all stakeholders are different. Some stakeholders like visual picture. I'm a picture person, right? I remember things in 2,000 photographs in the head all the time. Other people I know are not. They like data. So and equally worked for a colleague, and I didn't realize for the first 2 months I kept talking about and showing people colors, and he said, he teased me after a while. I said, just so you know, I'm colorblind, can we do something about this? So it opens your eyes to, it's not for everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to bring through really quick questions now, so really short answers.
Good steer.
Where do you start with prioritisation? So this is a great subject. A lot of people are really into this at the moment. We've talked about it at the top of the hour. But where do you start with it, Graham?
Okay, so to follow your lead on short, quick answers. So where do you start? Strategy, number 1, which is typically a statement or statements. Strategic objectives that link to that, typically 4 or 5, something like that. Some sort of traceability matrix between those strategic objectives and the projects and programs you have running. underpinning all that then would be a board approved, or top leadership, whatever it's called, board approved set of prioritization criteria.
Okay.
Typically, if you've got a PMO function, you would then hand that to the PMO and they do that desk-based analysis based off information gathering, challenge, discussion, etc. And they could churn that through an algorithm because you have some criteria. You might have them weighted, each has a score, and you can give a score to each project, and therefore that's the priority.
Yeah.
What typically then happens in the real world is, even though you've got your board membership to agree to the criteria, when their project comes out near the bottom, they want to challenge. And then that's why you then have to have a conversation around the portfolio, because suddenly they don't like the prioritization criteria because their pet project is at the bottom of the list. So that's how I would start tackling prioritization.
Yeah, perfect, brilliant, short. Yeah, I think I love that. Clear, transparent. Get on with it. I like that one. Right.
Kinda.
So, how do we keep documents and resources consistent when starting new projects? You got a quick answer for this one?
So as part of the broadest PMO design, that's tailor-made for having some sort of center of excellence solution. So a C of E is typically a permanent office. It doesn't stand up for a project or program and wind down when it's finished. Yeah. It's not portfolio facing upwards. It's more, it owns how we do stuff, which therefore covers things like templates, where you file things, data management, SharePoint sites, how-to guides, where do I find X. So that would certainly deal with the documents. Yeah. How do we keep resources consistent? That's a little trickier. So then you're back to that conversation we're having earlier around where do PMs sit?
Yes.
Right, in a PMO function. But actually, if you're a big organization with a big portfolio of change, upscale it. Why don't you have a delivery function where you have PMs, you have business analysts, you have genuine professional change management people, not people that do comms, those sorts of things. So that then infers you have a resource of people with their own skills, and there's arguments for having hit teams. So the one PM works with the same two BAs, which work with the same change manager, and they go from one to another because they're just, you therefore avoid the storming phase. They just go and hit the road running. Yeah. Problem with that is that team might get a bit stale. They delivered a couple of projects really well. Of course, we'll deliver the next one and they take the foot off the gas. So then you might want to change it around. Okay, that's as far, keeping resources consistent is a strange question, but that you're looking at a delivery function that has expertise in the various elements of change, not just project management, I think.
Yeah. And of course, for a lot of organizations, a center of excellence is not necessarily called that, is it? It's like, it's not this thing. It's normally some kind of permanent PMO.
Yes.
And it can be called many different things, but it's
more often than not, it will be called PMO.
Yeah, probably. It's just this term, Centre of Excellence. We tend to use it. We use it in the PMO competency framework. It's the term that has become synonymous with those things that you've described, which is where the templates live. It's where the methods and the frameworks and all of that kind of stuff sits, because there has to be that consistency. New project starts, you're not starting from scratch and trying to reinvent everything every single time. So so I'm going to finish on a really and this is something that is becoming more and more apparent, with the whole world of PMO, as we've got project controls generally tends to be organizations that are more kind of construction and engineering, and that's what they tend to call their PMOs, call them project control officers or stuff like that. So why is project controls treated differently, or is different to PMO? What's your thoughts on this, Graham?
Tricky. I'm not very familiar with project controls, which suggests therefore I've probably worked in lots of banks and things of that sort where they don't have that necessarily. I've got a colleague who's quite senior in a construction company. I'm sure they do. So my response would be, I would consider controls to have an adoption focus. So it controls the way things are done. So it controls, possibly owns the framework for managing projects. It controls and owns how we plan, cost, and all that sort of thing. And therefore, my response would be that could be a reasonably junior function, because you're pointing and signposting people to how we control the way we deliver projects. Whereas a PMO, you're providing more of a delivery function, a critical friend type service. Typically, you'd need a little more gravitas and experience to do that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what we, me personally, think about this. We've been talking to many different people about it. It's because generally with the construction and engineering, people know how to build a bridge. Yeah, people know how to build a road or a railway. It's been done many times. So actually, it's more about to me, it's an easier thing, because you know generally what that thing is going to end up like.
Yes.
Take a business and IT type businesses where PMO sits. Often what they're delivering has never been done before. Yeah. So where it's with the construction and engineering firms, it is very much like they can do things very structured on. They can really nail down their costs. They know exactly material wise, resource wise, and it's all quite known, and you can be tighter on it. And of course you need to, because a lot of it's very related to health and safety and risk management and all that kind of thing. Whereas, the business and IT, it is a lot more unknown unknowns than there are different people, and they're using different tools. They're using, things like that. So I think that's why they are treated differently, because essentially they are supporting a different type of organization.
Yeah. So So I've heard it called painting by numbers, where we've done it before. There's a picture in a box. Somebody else has then drawn all the outlines and removed the pictures and said, right, make all the twos blue, make all the greens one. It's that sort of, we've done it before, we know what we're doing. It's kind of the same again. Another way of looking at it is the greater the need for innovation, the further away from control you're going to be, and the more towards what we might call a traditional PMO that provides services to support delivery of something that's not been done before or is similar but not quite the same, and there needs to be that experiential refinement of how we do things required.
Yeah, and I would argue that in project controls, they're not worrying about agile, scrum, agile at scale, any of that stuff, because
I would entirely agree. If you're talking of controlling something, you're command and control, right? Which is a waterfall, which is that's the thing we need to deliver. Plan how you're going to get there and control the hell out of it.
Yes. Yeah, which is, to be fair, when I first started out around PMO 20 years ago, I remember all the pictures of the control traffic control towers to depict PMOs and all that kind of stuff. That's very much project controls. It's not where a lot of IT and business related PMOs are, and I can't imagine. I can see why agile and different agility and different ways of working are creeping in, because it needs to. We need to be adaptable to whatever it is that we're trying to innovate on. So it makes perfect sense. Doesn't make the job for PMO easy, but that's why it makes it fun, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
every day's a learning day.
Every day is a learning day, indeed. So thank you very much. Those are the questions that we had, and we had a load more, and we will be sharing them. We'll be dropping them out on social media and stuff to see what other people think. But we're going to be putting, you can see all of the questions that we've just done with Graham if you've watched all of this through. But we will be breaking them up, putting them out there, and we'll get other people's opinions and see whether they agree with you, Graham, to the stupid questions. But they weren't stupid at all. But we love the idea. The whole idea, by the way, was that it was introduced in American schools to try and help children to get a little bit more involved in class, put their hand up, to ask more questions. So that's where it comes from. And I think it's been a perfect thing for PMO. So really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Graham. We'll see you in the den.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure.